And people don't like to offend those that they have to work with daily, right? So an outside expert tends to bring authenticity to what you're trying to say or have been trying to say. And sometimes your leaders also won't listen to you because you're, quote, maybe part of the noise in their minds, right? Unless it comes from an outside expert that they themselves have invested money in to help them solve it. So there's some behavior science at work here, too, as to why bring in an outside person.
Welcome to episode 54 of the Inner Game of Change podcast, where I focus on exploring the multi-layers of managing and enabling organizational change. I am Ali Juma, and this is the Inner Game of Change podcast. My guest today is Dana Houston Jackson, a change maker with over 2 decades in the intricate world of organizational transformation. A writer who translates ideas into action, and a doer who has been at the forefront of radical shifts. Inspired by Levitt's belief that people implement ideas, Dana combines a wealth of expertise from AI and behavioral economics to positive psychology. In this episode, Dana and I dive deep into the world of change consultants, internal versus external capabilities, and the pros and cons for each. I am grateful to have Dana chatting with me today. Well, Dana, thank you so much for joining me in the Inner Game of Change podcast. I am grateful for your time today.
Thank you, Ali. And I want to commend you for your dedication to the field these last 4 or 5 years. You've got quite a collection of knowledge and expertise there in your podcast. I've been following it for a while.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Dana, today we're going to talk about external change management consultants versus the internal teams. It's an interesting topic that's been sort of circling around, and I just want to explore the pros and cons of both models and perhaps how we can capitalize on both models as well. But before we dive deep into the conversation, Dana, it would be fantastic for my listeners to know a little bit about you.
Great. Well, happy to. I'm Dana Houston Jackson, originally from Dallas, Texas, and that's a phrase you're a lot less likely to forget. Dana Houston Jackson from Dallas, Texas, right? And being from a multi-generational Texas family, we kind of like our namesake. And hopefully you'll be more likely to find me on LinkedIn now, too.
Yes.
But this year I actually made a big change, Ali. I stepped back after 30 years of building a portfolio of skills and experiences and kind of knowledge in a multitude of industries and many years of organizational and people change consulting. So I went ahead and hung a shingle, right? A woman-owned solopreneur under the banner of Change with a Coach Approach, LLC. And it aligned with a practical and useful book and art that I'm creating right now for all my change peeps all over the world. This work, though, has had to drastically change just this year with all the AI advances these past 12 months, which we can talk about. But my particular LLC here is an experiment, right? Like any other change, I certainly retain the right to jump back in on board of some good employee-owned team that they're doing work I'm interested in.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, Ali, when you work for a corporation, though, or an industry that kind of specializes in specific types of work, you can be pretty limited, right, to the type of clients you get to work with or the type of work you get to do. And there's a lot of overhead cost that's necessary, right, for larger organizations. But that's not the case for a single shingle solopreneur, so less overhead. It made it so I could help people that wouldn't necessarily have access to talent like myself, and they couldn't afford the $300 or $350 an hour that these big firms charge for people and talent like me.
Fantastic. And single and shingle solopreneur, that can be your next article, Dana.
That is a good one.
Yes, that is a good one.
I'll put out a newsletter on that one. I'm right in the middle of my website. I finally got my logo done. So when my website goes live, I'll put out the newsletter.
Fantastic. And congratulations and good luck with
Thank
that.
You.
Today, we're going to talk about the external versus the internal consultancy group, and that is related to managing change within an organization. But I want to start with an obvious statement. Managing change in the workplace is a very complex and tricky business. What do you think?
While I agree that managing change is tricky, I don't think it has to be as tricky as it's been made.
Yeah.
Something's broken in today's organizations. I believe that the current organization structures and the metrics and the systems, the way they've been designed, makes change tricky for people. I mean, we need executives to be more architects of these systems now, right? So they can organically allow the right behavior and the results to emerge. They can't be so much in the weeds. We don't have the time and energy. It's too complex of an organization. And personally, I think we're right on the cusp of a radical shift in how change is handled in organizations. And I don't mean an incremental shift, Ali. I mean a radical change, because we can't sustain the way it's been and is being done. People at the top of existing groups, no matter how smart they are, they don't have enough bandwidth to grasp and deal with all the complexity in our organizations today. And hierarchy and centralized decision-making, which is what we live under today, that can never master this level of speed and complexity.
Yes.
Our systems are our systems right now, they're reaction systems. I'm sure you've experienced that in the communication world, right?
Absolutely,
something happens, right? In the regulatory or environmental or competitive or political, and we try to respond. And most of those changes are top down. And people have enforced metrics or are compensated the way management wants them to behave.
Yeah.
Most of our changes, they're someone else's idea. And the people they're on the ground, boots on ground. They just have to comply with them. I mean, I just spent 6 years consulting for the energy sector, and it was ripe with this. People just were not having fun at work. And C-level executives down to those boots on grounds are exhausted and they're change saturated.
The way I look at leadership in general, and I know we want to talk a lot about the internal versus external and consultancy and managing change. The way I see leaders, and I think your point around is no longer acceptable that the leaders are not really embedded within the business in driving those changes. I look at a leader's job, and I simplified it in my head. A leader's job, they go to work every day to help their people succeed, not to write checkbooks and all of that. How they make their people and help their people succeed is by making decisions that are actually worthwhile for the company, the stakeholders, the customers. Those decisions become changes, and you need people to help you manage those changes. So this is why it's in a leader's best interest to be, as we could say, active, visible, and an advocate to helping an organization manage and help people adopt the change. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I've got a slightly different spin on it.
Sure.
I can't say that the way executives and leaders have been working right now, I've run into quite a few who just lost faith in them because the multitude of changes that have been made and that have been forced on them in the past years haven't resulted in an easier time for people.
Yeah.
But it's resulted in more work and more friction and more pain. And you lose trust with people that bring you more pain and more difficulties, right? So I think that the system, even for leaders, the processes that they're following, the way that they're thinking about it is what we need to switch. And I know we're going to talk about internal and external consultancy, but I'd love to stay on this for just a minute because I think it will very much impact how our change consultancy as a discipline changes, right? It's changing right now and in the very near future, whether or not you're internal or external.
Yes.
So if you would like, if you could, I'd love to do a little quick dream exercise with you and just kind of flip this around a little bit.
Go for it.
Would you? Okay, perfect. So Ali, I'm going to ask you this, and this is obviously for your listeners as too. So I want them to stay with me, and I want you to stay with me on this one. Just kind of clear your mind and imagine this as I say this and describe this. Imagine this with your own teams, right, that you're working with right now. I would say, so this dream exercise, I want you to imagine what would happen if the only changes that were made were those changes that your teams itself wanted and needed. There were no more changes from above. you and your team, they had a purpose. So you tossed all the work activities on the table necessary to accomplish that purpose. I mean, forget the roles and titles that everybody was hired to do. But instead, each of you just picked up whichever pieces you wanted to do most, and you outsourced those pieces that you didn't like doing or rotated them through the team for a limited time, and you grew a new structure and a system. I mean, this team, just imagine it was self-regulating, self-forming, self-measuring, and self-correcting. And that means, of course, you've already upgraded all the basic practices of managing to be self-managing,
yes,
right? And not the misconception that self-managing usually brings into people's minds, but you have a structure and a coordinating mechanism, but you operate more powerfully without bosses, no bosses, but yes to structure and processes around decisions and conflict. Think about this and what this would do and to change people's roles definitions, because it's not working the way we're doing it right now. There's no executive committees. There's no Soviet-style central planning committee of any kind who's trying to control the complexity and bottlenecking decisions. I mean, imagine if you and your team created measures to match real-world results that you were after, including money made, and you had the skills and the safety amongst yourselves to kind of originate your own changes in response to new factors and data.
Yes.
The goal wasn't to make everyone equal. That's not the goal in this dream. It's that all employees get to grow into their strongest, healthiest versions of themselves, including these overloaded executives. So let me ask you, in that scenario, who would be originating and designing the changes to remove frustrations, to speed up those results activities, right, inside the team? Who would be organically going ahead and seeking out new innovative possibilities and being willing to experiment and test and pivot on all those ideas if they aren't seeing the results on the metrics?
Yeah.
Would that be an outside change consulting, Allie? No, it really wouldn't. I mean, this is not just only an imaginative exercise in changing word meanings around ways of working or org design or change management. This is a deep shift in perspective on how we look at humanistic management and the future of change leadership. And we know a deep shift in perspective takes time, but guess what? This has already started.
I think it has started already. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, there's companies with parts of this right now. There's entire companies with all of it, too. It's being done. I mean, you can look at Tier 1 based out of Kentucky in the United States, right? It's a 330-person consulting firm, and they invented their own dynamically distributed authority model that channels decisions and resources far more fluidly, right, to the most appropriate person for it. Or look at groups like Corporate Rebels, right? They publish examples and they have interviews with groups doing this all over the world.
Yeah.
I just finished a book called Reinventing Organizations. That is packed full of real companies who are making this shift in industries. This is where we're putting and need to put our time and energy. This is the root cause behind the friction and the need to invent the discipline and roles of change management in the first place as we define them. But all that will take some time. So right now we have our roles and we're fighting a good fight. So I'm happy to kind of answer questions on how we're operating today and can be operating internally and externally.
Absolutely. What you're talking about here, we're moving lots of organizations, and I've witnessed that maybe not a whole organization, but at least different business units within an organization, they started thinking about the top-down approach is not sustainable, and organically led change by people or people-centric change has got far more reaching benefits for an organization, and also most of the time improves employee engagement, and they see a purpose in their role apart from the usual, mundane list of tasks. Now, the challenge is that command and control sentiment, is that going to be let by the leaders? Is that going to be something easy for them to let go of? There'll be, I think that's the fight you're talking about here. But it certainly is happening, and it is a good fight. And then at some stage, evidence will be all over the place, and then we'll start seeing change managed in a different way. That does not mean, though, Dana, that we don't need external consultants.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, no, there's definite benefits for hiring external consultants, right? Even right now. And even what I described, too, that's going to take a lot of help to achieve, right? I can tell you, I now am finding and speaking with more executives than not who are willing to make a change like that, to make a team, because they can't sustain it either. Most executives don't become executives because they want to be miserable and they want to not help people, right? It's just the opposite. So they're willing for a change too. They can't see how to sustain that.
So from where you sit, what do you see the key benefits of hiring an external consultant to help an organization manage change internally?
Yeah, I'll give you three big ones that I think in today's organization structures, right? When you're in the thick of it, when you're swimming in your own pot of soup, right? You can't always see the few changes, the few gaps to fill, that 20% that's going to give you 80% of desired results.
Yeah.
It's harder to pull focus when you're in the thick of it. And that takes an outside perspective, someone that's not swimming in your pool. And people don't like to offend those that they have to work with daily, right? So an outside expert tends to bring authenticity to what you're trying to say or have been trying to say. And sometimes your leaders also won't listen to you because you're, quote, maybe part of the noise in their minds, right? Unless it comes from an outside expert that they themselves have invested money in to help them solve it. So there's some behavior science at work here too, as to why bring in an outside person. That would be one. The second one is there's plenty of academic subjects, like behavior science or positive psychology and so forth, and case studies that show that when you have different types of subgroups under a larger umbrella, like mini divisions or different general practices under one company title, that you've worked with them, and as you continue to work within each one of those divisions, they tend to form their own mini-verse, I like to say, right? We called them silos, but they're really their own little mini verse. It's like you step into their universe, their own culture, their own ways of working, their personalities. And let's say there's a merger, or even in your transformation, you want to get rid of 7 general practices and bring it down to 4. Well, it's a human instinct to not necessarily trust a boss of one subgroup who comes in to lead your existing group. So one of the solutions is to bring in an outsider, someone who isn't seen as having vested interest or competing with the status quo, someone who understands the issues and, more importantly, understands people. So that would be a second one. I think the third one, and another benefit that I find near and dear to my heart, it's someone who has and will take the time to, for compassionate and deep listening. Applied through maybe a coaching framework that really allows someone and a group of people to examine their ingrained and various perspectives that, may be creating behavior that holds them or the team back from fulfilling their purpose. An external talented change coach can offer this as a necessary step, right, to create a deep shift in perspective when other managers and internal leaders just don't have the skill or the time.
Yeah.
Those would be just 3 big ones off the top of my head.
I also see, to add to that, Dana, that external consultants, and I played a role myself in previous jobs, we've got a lot of exposure on industries, a lot of evidence-based cases, what worked, what didn't work within that industry. We don't have the bias that we have, that the internal people have. It's almost like that sentiment detachment can be a positive thing for an external consultant. And expertise and capability. I also find that sometimes speed is a benefit for an external consultancy. An internal, they're probably entangled with the bureaucracies, whereas the external, most of the time, because you pay them good rates, we make time for them. And then when we make time, things move rather fast within an organization. I also find them really beneficial for strategic thinking. So rather than the small projects, they look at an organization holistically, which can be a benefit for an external consultant. Whereas if you are, as you mentioned, in a mini-verse you will only see your walls, or you don't necessarily see the whole picture. So it depends on the initiative, it depends on the remit, it depends on what the organization is trying to achieve in there. And the last thing that I want to add is an external consultant is an added resource to the organization. So it does not interrupt somebody from doing their normal job to actually help with managing change. So these are the things that I see are some of the benefits for external agencies.
Yeah, great ads.
Anything has got a pros and cons for it. And I'm going to start with the first one that people talk about most of the time is cost. Cost for an external consultant is obviously way more than what people pay for internal managers for change. And I've got my own theory anyway. I mean, you pay more for the value you get. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that. I think one take I would think on it, though, that it really, I look at it and I always evaluate against the result, meaning why are you making the change in the first place?
Sure.
Right? The whole reason and purpose behind change management is because you're trying to get something done.
Sure.
And you're paying money to get that done. And people are a key element to that. You have the technology, you have the solution itself, but you've got the people using it. One of my mantras here is the business value is achieved in what gets used, not just design and build.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I would say that there's another maxim in our change discipline, and it's a truth that we have to follow. In its most simplified form in this mantra would be, if you're going to change me, include me, right? Change is a team sport. And the ideal change is originated from the team members themselves. And if the org structure and the metrics don't allow them to originate their own change, then at least having them involved in designing and executing the change is going to be necessary for the change to be successful and to stick. The whole reason you're paying for it to happen in the first place.
Yes.
So when you bring in an outside external consultant, especially one that doesn't know your language or your specific industry issues or your own company culture, and that's not something, by the way, they're going to get with no mistakes in a week or two, as much as people think that may be the case. But when you put him or her up on a pedestal and you say, hey, here's the Wonder Woman, right, or Superman that's going to make all your change dreams come true. Well, you've just painted a very ugly target on them, right, for all those folks who love the status quo and who want to keep it the same, those that are maybe angry with the pent-up emotions, with leaders that didn't include them in their big strategic decisions and plans or didn't allow them to help shape the implementation. So those would be some cases, too, that would be benefits or drawbacks for that.
Fantastic. And obviously an external consultant would not have the established relationships within an organization. And or some of them do because they do multiple projects for the same organization, so they know. But there is a drawback, and it's a card that people always draw against the case for external consultant, is that they're not there for the long game. They're there for the short game. What do you say about that?
I would say yes. Anytime you're hiring a consultant, you're coming in to handle and address a specific thing, right? And now it may not be the right thing. A good consultant will ask the right questions and may find that there's another root cause that is creating the situation in the first place. A good consultant always leaves their client much better off than they found them, right? But frankly, I got into this line of work in the first place because I got tired of building and designing things that didn't get used, right? It's a waste of time, which wastes life, and life's too vital to waste. So I don't like to waste time trying to change the surface manifestations of a real root problem. If I waste mine on my client's time, then I'm out of there, right? I'm not much value as a consultant. So I try to take the extra steps in the effort to understand really what's the real world result that they're after. And it may not be addressing it in the way that they're proposing or thinking it needs to be addressed. Frankly, if they knew how to solve the solution, they probably wouldn't be hiring a consultant.
Yes.
I tend to take at times a different spin on it.
Yep. Fantastic. And I want to shift gear and talk about internal, let's call them internal consultants, building a capability within an organization to manage certain types of changes. has got its own benefits. What would be some of those benefits, Dana?
Yeah, when I take a change engagement, I'm usually running two work streams at the same time. First, I have to meet my client, and that includes my internal client, right? Where they're at, help them to go to where they, help them to get to where they want to get to at a pace that they can handle, all geared around the work that they're hiring me to do, whether that be internal or external, right? And the second work stream, though, is I'm always working to increase their own change skills, their own change maturity, and how they handle people and organizational change. They're going to usually handle 100 changes to my one or two that they're bringing me in for.
Yes.
And whether they're hiring me from the outside or bringing me internally. And I'm not around for all their changes. So I do this because I frankly think change management fundamentals is a skill each person has to have.
Yep.
They have to learn and they have to practice it in their everyday operational work. So it needs to become a way of working for all of them and not something so specialized that only a few can do it. I think this is why we're working ourselves out of a job as external or internal change consultants to some degree, at least the way we've been doing it. Well, that and probably all these AI tools like ChatGPT are replacing the advice and the theory knowledge that we had that was distinctly ours and we could offer. I mean, now you can just type in your questions and get pretty good answers out of ChatGPT.
Yes.
So our specialities and our focus are changing. So any of us that have been in the advice business, we have to evolve thanks to good old AI that's freely offered. So whether or not, of course, whether or not you have the skill or not to implement something is different than talk about something.
Yeah.
And internally, you've got a leg up and a disadvantage. I mean, like all of us, I've kind of been in both roles more than once. When I'm internal, I have the time to get to know the players and the game and the culture and the real advocates and kind of the ideas holding them back. I can come off more authentic, I think, because they see me in real time doing real things, and you can't deep fake that, right? I can see more of the bigger picture while building deeper relationships, over time internally. I did a webinar a couple years ago for, I guess, a webinar and a podcast for a change management review about the two enemies of personal change. The two big enemies are time and force. So the more time you can give people and the less force you use, meaning you make it more enjoyable, then it's easier for the person to get past the threats that change bring to them and to their minds. It makes it easier for them to engage and adopt the change. Well, when I'm not on a fixed scope, billable clock, right? When I get to be an internal change person, so I'm not on that, then I typically have more freedom and time to apply some lean and agile, principles and create change experiments and pivot faster in new directions as the data warrants it. I mean, as long as I have well-informed, invested leaders, of course.
Yes.
But when I'm an external change consultant, right? That means I'm not boiling in their soup or swimming in their pool, right? I have a lifeguard view. I can get in, help make an adjustment to their pH levels and get out. So, I also think there's advantages being external because I personally get to experience more clients and more situations. So that helps me spot gaps faster with future clients.
Yeah, that's what I talked about. You've got the industry insight. You've got things that worked in the past did not work, and therefore speed is one of the advantages of an external consultant. I want to tap more into the internal. It is a capability. Completely agree with you that I advocate for that, and every time I go and speak and talk and implement change myself as a professional, I do advocate that we are, first of all, we are all change managers. We do it in different ways, but it's the same principle. We communicate and we would like our messages to land. We make changes regardless of if it's moving one group from one room to another. That is actually a change. It's got a lot of complicated associations with it, and so we always do that. And the idea is that I am there to enable those capabilities that you have, And also I can play different roles. I can advise. I think the expertise that, for example, somebody like me would like to advocate for any business is that the normal stuff can be done easily once you coach an internal team, and then especially after a couple of projects or changes, they get the gist of it. But the real advantage that you can get from an experienced professional, especially externally, is that they can be useful when there's a problem and you don't have a solution for that problem. The other thing is that for internal teams, they already have established relationships. You call it they're swimming in the same pool. I call it they are in the arena. They know what's happening, and they have, all we allow them to do is give them a little bit of psychological safety and show them that a lot of change empathy on the way they run the organization. The argument that always comes up is that an external consultant will come in there and then finish, whereas the internal will be interested in the long-term game, which is how to sustain change for a long term rather than roll out a change and finish as a remit for an external consultant.
Yeah, I agree. I think also as an external consultant, one advantage, though, is I get to coach people I don't report to, and I get to have radical candor.
Yeah.
Meaning 50% of my value is I get to go home at the end of the day.
Yes.
And that frees me up to poke some of the status quo and some of the strategy points, right? I'm not worried about my own career and promotions internally. I'm paid to be different and unique.
Yes.
I think that's an advantage for external too. I think there's a disadvantage for internal. If you're just using internal and not pulling an external person, I think that's around focus. They get pulled into whatever is the perceived fire is, right? And that may not be where the actual root cause is, which created the need for the change in the first place.
Yeah.
I mean, for the change practitioner internally, there's an advantage, of course, and that's the steady paycheck.
Definitely that, spot fires and all of that can play a role. It can be far more useful to have internal. However, I always talk about that seeing the big picture is a great capability that an internal person will always miss unless you are in a leadership role where you can see the whole organization. The other thing is that you mentioned an external consultant. I've always been fascinated when I worked as an external person. I do not present any threat to somebody internally. I'm not after their jobs and all of that. So that can alleviate the level of threat when it comes to these people. The smart internal people will actually take a lot of knowledge out of me because I'm not a threat to their role and their status within an organization. So really the smart ones will drain the knowledge out of me, and I'll be more than happy to actually share that knowledge as well, because the more they understand it, the better for me to actually help an organization. So that's how I look at it. I want to ask you a question around, when you make a decision whether it's an internal or external, what would be some of the considerations apart from cost?
Well, if you're making consideration, kind of key questions you could probably ask yourself. I would ask questions like this, meaning, are my exec sponsors and leaders clear and aligned on the change? And if not, do I have the power and skill to make it so?
Yeah.
Another question is there a power play and heavy politics, right? If I wade into that, it may be bad for my career, right?
Yes.
Another question could be, do I have enough hands to get the work done in a way that my organization currently works? Another question would be, maybe, do I need a radical change, right? I may not be positioned to do a radical change. Couple more questions you could ask is, would having an outside third party, consultant help me overcome the politics and the egos and the territory grabbing that less change mature teams and leaders get into? And I think last one is, do I personally need some coaching myself to increase my skill sets and streamline, my mind so that I can lead the change? Do I need help?
Yeah. Those
are some of the questions I think you could ask and get answered as to whether or not you would pull, engage an external consultant or rely on internal teams.
And Dana, that's an absolutely important point, is that you can get an external consultant, but they can only work with the leader. They don't need to be engaged with the organization, and they can play as a coach to the leader as well, to manage change internally.
Yeah. Some of the other things, I think for an external consultant and an advisor, I think you'd grab that role when you need a lifeguard view or that radical candor or that gap spotting, right, and filling. Or you need to merge those two subgroup cultures, or you're thinking, I can't put my finger on it feeling, right? Or I don't know which way to go with this strategy, or I have no idea where to start. Or maybe like in the energy sector, when you've got a regulatory reason, I need a professional recommendation for a regulatory reason. Or in the IT sector, right? I don't even know the latest technology or the techniques. They're happening so fast. I need someone to help us and train us at the same time. Those are the sorts of things, and then hopefully when you're ready to also restructure your organization or kind of build new ones that I spoke about earlier, then that would be a good time for some external consultants to help you design and plan and kind of remove all those unworkable mindsets or false data in people.
Fantastic. You're talking about here the specific types of initiatives you have to consider when it comes to external versus internal as well. And absolutely right. Technology is one of those things that usually, especially around compliance and governance, usually organizations go to external consultants. They are the specialists in the field, and they've got all the tools and capabilities to actually make those things happen. And sometimes they actually do a great job because they make the change very seamless within an organization.
I think we'd have to divide that, though. Change consultants aren't the same as change contractors. I want to make clear there's actually 3 different types of change resources.
You're right, yeah. And would you like to elaborate on that, please? Yes.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, you have the external change consultant or advisor, right? You have the change contractor, and then you have the internal change management, employee. And we're adding a new role into that, the change coach to the list. And a coach is not a consultant or an advisor, but more on that on a future podcast. I just described when you would hire an external consultant or advisor, right? For an internal change resources, I think that there's a lot of communication and training and daily meetings and other day-to-day activity, work that needs to be done. And I would use internal change management folks for that because that consumes a lot of time. And you have to know the other players in the organization to get those newsletters out, to get the video made, right? To get the meetings for the training slots booked on calendar. That there's an advantage to working internally when you're doing that. When you hire an external change contractor, it's because you simply don't have enough hands, right? There's a lot of work and activities that needs to get done. If you're going to get 3,000 people or something using new software and following new processes and talking and thinking differently about how they do their work, that's a lot of work right there and how we're structured. You don't need a seasoned external senior change consultant or advisor to help you get those 3,000 people onto new software when the decision's already been made. You need a change contractor to help the team.
Well put, Dana. A really good way of looking at the different types so that people don't get confused, of the different types and then the type of initiatives and the value you can get from each type as well. We are coming close to the end of the podcast. I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation, and certainly I've learned quite a few things from you, especially the analogy around swimming in the same pool, Dana. What would be the 3 takeaways that you would like our change management community to probably consider?
I would say, sometimes I think we forget that we humans created the organization structure and the ways of working now that we're struggling with. And only we can change it. I mean, I honestly believe that we're on a cusp of a radical shift in our world to build more powerful, purposeful organizations that just don't suck the soul out of people. And I'm excited for this. There's bad actors with vested interests that may want to keep it the same, but enough of us are clamoring for a change when we toss ideas around like empowerment and co-creation and co-design and engagement and inclusivity. We're all done with the old ways of working that are just too much friction and bring too much pain. So right now, our very complex world requires this reinvention of organization and teams. I think that there's a fundamental root cause to most change issues that we've experienced, and that is the org structures and metrics that are creating a game board that causes our own problems. And it's time to rebuild that game board, not keep pushing the pieces around. So that is going to change the entire discipline of change management and change advisories, as it's been called these last 20 years. No longer are we going to be working to help people adopt someone else's changes or engage in someone else's ideas, but we're elevating the entire system and set of people so that they're designing their own change and making those changes to achieve the whole group's purpose as to why they exist in the first place and to achieve those results, right? And that's going to make some of the change management and the way that we've been working in the past obsolete. But it opens a much bigger playing field for us, a blue ocean, not an existing red ocean that we're all swimming in. We've got a long way to go, but that's the bandwagon to be on moving forward. And lastly, I say this to all my change peeps out there, we can no longer be in the change advice business. Data, compiled info, and good suggestion, and good suggested advices, that can all be generated now by AI and Chat GPT.
Within seconds.
Yeah, within seconds. They've already collected all of our thoughts and our ideas and our words, and they've compiled them, frankly, more succinctly than most of us could.
Sure, yes.
And that's impacting the ways of our working right now, right? It's faster than Google search. There's less effort, like you said, right? The output is also nuanced and it sounds sincere and it's learning from us. And frankly, it has some pretty good and concise advice because it was our advice,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So this cannot be our specialty anymore. Instead, we have to be more one-on-one with people, look them in the eyeballs, be the authentic you. We have to coach our authentic leaders to be believable, right? Town halls are too staged. Videos can be faked. Corporate speak emails aren't even read and could be created by an AI bot, right? And probably are. So I would tune into this subject. I would recommend following a rational change and Edwin's work on this, right? She's given a whole series of webinars on AI and Chat GPT this year for the change management community. It's very useful.
Yes, fantastic. Really sage advice. And I'm certainly with you. I like the idea of to be the authentic you. So the authentic change manager or change practitioner is probably the new norm that we would like to push out there. We will be, if we move away from the mechanics of writing emails and all of that and actually start adding more value to people's capability and their ways of thinking, that will be a far more sustainable role for the change management community.
Yes.
Thank you very much for this, Dana. How would employers and people reach out to you?
Well, thanks. I'm still a single shingle, right?
A single shingle solopreneur, yes.
That's right. A single shingle solopreneur.
Yes.
So I'll stay that way for as long as I can pay my rent.
Yes.
I just got my logo finalized and my website's due to go live in a few weeks. So for now, LinkedIn is always a reliable way to reach me. I almost always quickly respond. And just remember, Dana Houston Jackson from Dallas, Texas. I try to be your practical and affordable change coach.
I like how you're adding labels to yourself. Dana Houston Jackson from Dallas.
There you go.
Fantastic. I'm grateful for your time, Dana. It's been a pleasure having you on my podcast, The Inner Game of Change podcast. I hope I can get you back in the future and we tackle another topic. But until next time, stay well and stay safe.
Thank you, Ali. Happy to join in the future.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. If you found this episode valuable, remember to subscribe to stay updated on upcoming episodes. Your support is truly appreciated, and by sharing this podcast with your colleagues, friends, and fellow change practitioners, you can help me reach even more individuals and professionals who can benefit from these discussions. Remember, change is an enduring force, and collectively we have the capacity to navigate it more effectively. Stay motivated, keep expanding your knowledge, and be the positive change contributor in your circles and work. Until next time, thank you for being part of the Inner Game of Change community. I am Ali Jama, and this is the Inner Game of Change podcast.
That was fantastic, right? It was very interesting, and I love the engagement and the discussion.
Excellent. I really enjoyed it. I really appreciate your time.